The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge took his seat. The room was tense, filled with the weight of anticipation. Lawyers, experts, and spectators waited, their eyes locked on the front of the room. But at the center of it all, there was a single figure who didn't belong. A young boy, barely 12 years old, stood alone before the judge. His name was Elijah, though no one in the room knew that yet. All they saw was a child who was out of place in the formality of a courtroom, his small frame hidden beneath an oversized suit. His face, however, was unreadable, a mask of calm that betrayed nothing. No one knew it, but Elijah's mind was working at an intensity that outclassed even the most experienced lawyers present. Truth or lie? The judge's voice cut through the silence like a whip. He leaned forward in his chair, eyes narrowing as he studied the boy. It was a game, a simple game the judge often used to test witnesses. A child couldn't possibly have the skills to play at this level, the judge thought. But he had no idea who he was facing. Elijah didn't flinch. He simply stared back at the judge, his dark eyes unblinking. His heart beat steadily, his body poised, even though his mind raced through possibilities. The judge was an older man with a strong reputation, he prided himself on being sharp and perceptive. But Elijah was not the ordinary child who would shrink under his gaze. Far from it. Elijah's IQ had been tested more times than anyone could count, and every time, the result was the same. He was a legal genius in the making, far beyond his years. The judge repeated the question, his voice a little firmer this time. Truth or lie, Elijah? A quiet murmur ran through the courtroom. The boy's name had just been revealed. The whispers intensified, but Elijah remained still, unwavering. He had heard people talk about him behind his back, about how they expected him to fail, about how a boy of his age couldn't possibly know the intricacies of law the way he did. But none of that mattered now. He had been waiting for this moment for months. Elijah, the judge continued, oblivious to the pressure mounting in the room. Which will it be, truth or lie? The game had begun. The judge thought it was a simple test, just a way to fill time, to see if the boy could follow along. But the truth was, the game wasn't for Elijah, it was for the judge. Elijah's lips parted ever so slightly, his voice quiet but clear. Lie. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. The judge grinned. He'd expected that answer, but what he didn't expect was the chill that settled over him. He looked closely at Elijah, as if trying to see through the calm facade, searching for any sign of weakness. But there was nothing. The boy's gaze was steady and calculating, not a hint of fear in his eyes. What's the lie? The judge pressed, his tone now more curious than condescending. Elijah didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his mind processing the question with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. He could hear the slight shift in the air as the room waited for him to speak, every ear straining to catch his next words. But Elijah wasn't worried about impressing anyone. He was thinking about the game, about how to play it perfectly, how to use the judge's own words against him. The lie, Elijah began, his voice a little stronger now, is that I am just a child. The judge blinked, his smile faltering for a moment. He had expected a simple answer, something that wouldn't require him to think too hard. But Elijah's response hit him like a cold wave. It was a lie, yes, but it was a far deeper lie than the judge had anticipated. Elijah wasn't just playing games. He was telling the truth in a way the judge hadn't considered. I'm not just a child, Elijah repeated. I'm someone who knows more than most people in this room about the law. I could argue circles around every one of you. A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. The judge's eyes widened, his posture stiffening as he studied Elijah. The boy had just made a claim so bold, so unexpected, that it left the judge speechless. The lawyers, the experts, all of them could feel the shift in the air. The judge recovered quickly, though, and cleared his throat. I see. You're a very clever child, he said, his voice now tinged with both amusement and slight discomfort. "But let's see if you can back up that claim." He leaned forward again, eyes fixed on Elijah. "Tell me, Elijah. If you're so smart, why are you here? Why would a child like you be in a courtroom with adults, with the best legal minds around? You're in over your head." The challenge was clear, but Elijah wasn't fazed. He had anticipated this. The judge thought this was just a game, but Elijah knew that the real test was to make the judge question his assumptions. He wasn't just proving his intelligence. He was proving that he had the power to shift the dynamic of the room, to force even the most seasoned individuals to reconsider everything they thought they knew. "Because," Elijah said slowly, "I've already outsmarted everyone who underestimated me. And I'm going to do it again." There was a pause. A long one. And then the judge, to his credit, chuckled. He laughed, but it wasn't a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of a man who realized that something had shifted. Something he didn't fully understand was now in motion. But Elijah didn't stop there. His next words would be the ones that shocked everyone. "The truth, Judge," he continued, "is that I'm not here to play a game with you. I'm here to change the game." The courtroom fell deathly quiet. It wasn't the words themselves but the way he said them. There was no hesitation, no fear. Just the cold certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The judge leaned back in his chair, his mind whirling. He'd played this game countless times. With witnesses, but never with someone like Elijah. The boy was not only intelligent but confident, unshaken by the scrutiny of the courtroom. It was as if he knew something the rest of them didn't. And maybe, just maybe, he did. The judge cleared his throat again, trying to regain control of the situation. "All right, Elijah," he said, his voice softer now, "I think we've played enough games for today. But remember, the court is not a place for games. You'll have to prove yourself here, not with tricks, but with real knowledge." But Elijah didn't respond. He simply nodded, his eyes never leaving the judge's. And in that moment, something changed. The dynamic of the entire courtroom had shifted. The game was no longer in the judge's control. Elijah had taken the reins. The murmurs began again, but this time, they were different. People were beginning to realize something. The boy who stood before them wasn't just a kid. He wasn't just a legal genius. He was someone who could turn the entire system upside down if he chose to. And they had no idea what he was planning next. As the judge adjourned the session, no one moved. Everyone in that room had been caught in Elijah's web of intrigue. They were all wondering the same thing: who was this boy, and what was he really capable of? The game had just begun. The courtroom was quieter than it had ever been. The murmurs that had followed Elijah's challenge to the judge grew more intense, but no one dared to speak too loudly. People didn't know what to think, or perhaps, they simply couldn't believe what had just happened. A child, no more than 12, had stood there and rattled the confidence of some of the most skilled legal minds in the room. As the judge dismissed the session for the day, Elijah remained standing, his calm expression unchanged. He wasn't in a rush. He wasn't afraid of what was to come. Instead, he simply waited, his thoughts as steady as his posture. The judge, on the other hand, was anything but calm. His hands trembled slightly as he gathered his papers, the usual air of authority he wore now feeling a little too thin. He had been taken by surprise, something that hadn't happened in years. But the one thing that unsettled him the most was the eerie sense that Elijah was far more than a mere child. There was something behind those eyes. Something more than intelligence. The lawyers, too, could feel it. They had all seen kids with good grades, seen children who could memorize facts and figures, but what Elijah had just done was far beyond what any child should be able to do. His ability to dissect the game, the courtroom itself, and challenge a seasoned judge with words alone, left them all wondering, what was his story? And why was he here? It was late in the evening by the time Elijah returned home. His mother, a quiet woman with a gentle smile, was sitting in the living room, reading a book. She looked up as the door opened, her face brightening with a warmth only a mother could give. But there was something in Elijah's eyes, something his mother recognized immediately. It was the same look she had seen the day he'd first solved a complex legal case at the age of 7. "Elijah," she began softly, "how did it go today?" Elijah set his bag down on the chair, his movements slow, deliberate. He didn't look at her immediately. Instead, he walked over to the window and stared out into the darkening sky, his mind racing. "It's different now," he said quietly. "I can feel it. They won't forget what happened today." His mother didn't say anything at first. She simply let the silence hang in the air, understanding that Elijah needed time to process everything. He had always been that way, quiet, introspective, and intense. His mind worked in ways that no one could truly understand. After a few moments, she stood and walked over to him, resting a hand gently on his shoulder. "You know you're going to have to face them again tomorrow, right?" she said softly. "The judge, the lawyers, they're not going to let this go." Elijah nodded but didn't turn to face her. "I know," he replied. "But this isn't about them. It's about me proving what I can do. They think they know everything, but they don't understand that I have the power to change things." His mother's gaze softened as she studied his face. He had always been different. When Elijah was a child, she had watched as he devoured books, studied law, and picked apart complicated legal concepts with ease. He wasn't just a prodigy, he was driven by something deeper, a desire to challenge the system that had always overlooked people like him. "I don't want you to get hurt, Elijah," she whispered. "This game, it's dangerous. The court, the system, they're not kind to those who try to outsmart them." Elijah turned then, finally looking at her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes. "I've been underestimated my whole life," he said, his voice firm. "They think because I'm young, I'm powerless. But I know more than they do. I understand things they can't even begin to grasp." His mother sighed, her worry still etched in the lines of her face. She wanted to protect him, to shield him from the world's harsh reality, but she also knew there was no stopping Elijah once his mind was set on something. She had seen it before. "You have to be careful," she warned. "You're not just playing a game. This is real. These people, they don't play by the same rules you do." Elijah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned away from her and walked to the small desk by the window. On it was a stack of legal documents he had been reading over the past week, his fingers brushing over them absently as his mind drifted. The quiet was broken only by the soft rustle of paper as Elijah sorted through the files. "I'm ready," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "Tomorrow, I'll show them what I can do." The next day, the courtroom was filled with tension once again. Lawyers, experts, and spectators crowded the benches, their faces grim as they awaited Elijah's return. There was something in the air, a quiet anticipation that had settled over the room like a thick fog. No one spoke. The energy was different. Elijah entered the room, his presence commanding attention. He didn't look nervous. In fact, he looked more focused than ever. His eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail, his mind already working, calculating. He could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the way the judge watched him more closely, the way the lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't just concerned about his intelligence anymore. They were concerned about what he might do next. The judge called the court to order, his voice a little sharper than before. "Elijah," he began, "yesterday's game was unusual. But now we move on to the real reason we're here." Elijah didn't respond immediately. He took his seat at the witness stand, his gaze unwavering as he locked eyes with the judge. The courtroom was quiet, almost too quiet. No one knew what to expect. "You've made your claims, Elijah," the judge continued. "Now it's time to prove them. Show us your knowledge. Show us what you really know." Elijah sat up straight, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the witness stand. His voice, when it came, was calm but filled with authority. "I don't need to prove anything to you. The truth is, I already know the answers you're all too afraid to admit." A murmur spread through the room, but the judge remained silent, his eyes narrowing. He had expected a challenge. But this? This was something different. "Explain yourself," the judge demanded. Elijah leaned forward, his gaze never leaving the judge's. "You see, the system is broken. It's built on assumptions, on power, on the idea that only the strongest can win. But you've forgotten one thing. I'm not playing by your rules. I'm rewriting them." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time since Elijah had entered the courtroom, there was a shift in the energy. The judge's face faltered for a moment as he realized what Elijah was saying. This wasn't just a boy talking. This was a young genius who had found a way to turn the entire legal system on its head. And he wasn't done. Elijah's journey was only beginning, and the world would soon see that the game he was playing wasn't one they could ever win. With every word he spoke, every challenge he threw at the courtroom, he was pushing boundaries, breaking down walls that had stood for centuries. The question was no longer about whether he could change the game. The question now was, what would happen when he did? As the session drew to a close, the judge called for a recess. But the silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room knew something significant had just happened. They weren't sure what it meant yet, but they couldn't deny the truth any longer. Elijah was more than just a child. He was a force to be reckoned with. The tension was palpable. What would happen next? Could Elijah really bring about the changes he was talking about? Or was this all just the beginning of a far deeper mystery? Stay tuned. The answers are coming soon. The tension in the courtroom had escalated beyond anything anyone could have predicted. It wasn't just about a legal challenge anymore. Something bigger was unfolding, and it was impossible to ignore. Elijah had become the center of it all, and as he sat there, hands folded calmly in front of him, it was as if he was no longer a mere child. The murmurs among the crowd had turned to hushed whispers. Every move Elijah made was now scrutinized, every word he spoke carried weight. And though many in the room were still grappling with disbelief, one thing was clear: Elijah was in control. As the recess ended, everyone filed back into their seats, the room now even more tense than before. The judge, who had spent a restless night pondering Elijah's cryptic words, took his seat once again, his face hardening into the mask of authority. "Let's continue," the judge announced, his voice far more somber than before. "Elijah, your statements yesterday raised more questions than answers. If you have something to prove, now is the time." The judge's words seemed like a challenge, but to Elijah, they were simply the next step in the game he was already playing. The weight of the courtroom shifted with those words. It wasn't about legal facts anymore. It was about power, perception, and how the world would come to see Elijah's brilliance, or his threat. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving the judge's face. The room fell into silence, everyone hanging on his every move. "I don't need to prove anything," Elijah said calmly. "The truth speaks for itself. But if you want proof, I'll give it to you." The judge blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct answer. It wasn't the kind of response anyone would have expected from a child. Elijah was talking to him like an equal, no, like someone who knew the system better than the judge himself. For a brief moment, the judge's hand twitched, as if he might lose control of the situation. He had dealt with defiant witnesses before, but none like this. "What are you trying to say, Elijah?" he demanded, his voice betraying a hint of frustration. Elijah smiled slightly, a knowing smile that made the room uneasy. "What I'm saying is that I've already won. The system is so tangled, so broken, that you can't see the truth even when it's right in front of you. For the first time, Elijah's words were met with a silence so profound it felt suffocating. The room was full of highly educated people, the finest lawyers, and the most seasoned legal experts, and yet none of them could wrap their heads around what Elijah was claiming. The judge cleared his throat, regaining some composure. "What do you mean, Elijah? What truth are you talking about?" Elijah took a deep breath, then began, his voice steady and unwavering. "The system is built on lies. It's not about right and wrong. It's about who has power. Who has influence. Who can manipulate the facts to fit their narrative." A few gasps echoed through the room. The judge stiffened, but Elijah was far from finished. "I've studied the law for years. I've read every case, every rule, every precedent. But there's something no one talks about," Elijah continued. "There are loopholes, hidden agendas, and a system that bends for the rich and powerful. But the truth? The truth has nothing to do with those things." Elijah's words hung in the air, each one like a heavy stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread across the room. The lawyers, who had once looked at Elijah with skepticism, now regarded him with a mixture of awe and fear. They hadn't anticipated this. No one had. The judge leaned forward, his face a mix of curiosity and growing concern. "And you believe you have the answers?" he asked, his voice low. Elijah nodded slowly. "I do. But they're not the answers you want." The judge's jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed. "Then what do you want, Elijah? What do you want from this court?" Elijah paused for a moment, allowing the silence to stretch out. When he spoke again, his voice was soft but resolute. "I want to expose the truth. I want to show everyone that the system isn't just flawed. It's rigged. And I want to make sure no one else gets trapped by it." The words hit like a punch. Everyone in the room was stunned. The judge, the lawyers, the audience, they all stared at Elijah in disbelief. A child, a 12-year-old, was standing before them, challenging everything they thought they knew about justice. But it wasn't just about Elijah's intelligence. It was about something deeper, something that no one had expected from someone so young. The next day, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread quickly about Elijah's bold statements. News outlets covered the story, and soon the entire city was talking about the legal genius who had the audacity to call out the system. The tension in the air was palpable as the crowd waited for the next phase of the trial. Elijah entered the courtroom with the same calm demeanor he had displayed the day before. But today, there was something different in his eyes, a fire that hadn't been there before. He was no longer just playing the game. He was making his move. As Elijah took his seat, the judge and the lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. The room had grown colder. The unspoken question hung in the air: was Elijah really a genius, or was he just a child who had gotten lucky? And if he was a genius, what would that mean for the future of the legal system? The judge wasted no time. "Elijah," he began, "we're all waiting to see what you'll do next. You've made bold claims, but I want to know what you're really after." Elijah's gaze was steady, unblinking. He wasn't intimidated. "I'm after change," he said, his voice sharp. "The system is flawed, but no one wants to admit it. You don't want to change anything because it would destroy everything you've built. But I'm not here to protect your legacy. I'm here to bring the truth to light." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the judge was at a loss for words. The power dynamic in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer just about legal arguments, it was about a battle for truth. Elijah turned to face the jury, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "You all know what's wrong with the system. You all know that it's rigged in favor of the wealthy, the powerful, and the connected. But you've stayed silent because you're afraid of what will happen if you speak out. Well, I'm not afraid. The jury shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting from Elijah to each other. No one knew how to respond. What could they say to a child who spoke with such authority, such confidence? Elijah's words echoed through the courtroom, and the judge's face grew red with frustration. "Enough," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You're just a child. What do you know about the law? What do you know about power?" Elijah's eyes narrowed. "I know more than you think." Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy was in full swing. News reporters gathered in large groups, trying to get a glimpse of Elijah as he left the building. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in his face, and questions were thrown at him from all directions. But Elijah didn't flinch. He had known this would happen. He had prepared for it. As he made his way through the crowd, Elijah's thoughts were clear. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was about something bigger than himself. He wasn't fighting for recognition or fame. He was fighting for justice. And as the crowd buzzed around him, one thing was certain: the world was about to change, and Elijah was going to be the one to change it. The days following Elijah's bold statements in the courtroom were a blur of media attention, public outcry, and mounting pressure from all sides. The entire city was caught up in a whirlwind, captivated by the story of a child with a mind sharp enough to challenge an entire legal system. But for Elijah, the spotlight was only an obstacle. He wasn't interested in fame, he was on a mission to expose the truth. As the trial continued, the walls around Elijah seemed to close in tighter. He could feel the weight of the world pressing against him. It wasn't just about his battle with the judge anymore. It was about everyone else, too, the corrupt lawyers, the power brokers who manipulated the system, the ones who stood to lose everything if the truth came to light. And they would stop at nothing to make sure it stayed hidden. The next session of the trial arrived, and once again, Elijah walked into the courtroom, calm and composed. But the tension in the air was palpable. His eyes flicked briefly to the gallery of spectators, lawyers, reporters, curious citizens, but he wasn't distracted. His mind was already in the game, and he knew the stakes were higher than ever before. The judge, now clearly rattled by Elijah's unwavering confidence, sat at the bench, a tight frown etched across his face. He cleared his throat and addressed the court. "Elijah," he began, his voice tinged with frustration. "You've made your case. Now, you will answer for your actions. The system you claim is flawed, it's been in place for centuries. You can't just tear it apart with a few words." But Elijah wasn't listening. He wasn't even looking at the judge. Instead, his eyes were locked on the defense attorney, a seasoned lawyer named Robert Langley, who had a reputation for using every trick in the book to get his clients off the hook. Langley had been quiet throughout the trial, but Elijah could see the wheels turning behind his steely eyes. "Elijah," the judge's voice cut through the silence, "do you have anything to say?" Elijah finally looked at him. "I've already said enough," he replied, his voice steady. "But I'm willing to do more." There was a collective intake of breath in the room. What more could a child possibly do? Everyone was already on edge, and Elijah's words only heightened the sense of anticipation. "What do you mean, more?" the judge demanded, narrowing his eyes. Elijah stood up slowly, facing the entire courtroom. The room was silent now, the crowd hanging on his every move. His gaze swept across the jury, lingering on each of their faces. He could see the doubt in their eyes, but he also saw something else: uncertainty, fear. And that, more than anything, gave him confidence. "I mean," Elijah began, "I'm not here to play by your rules anymore." A murmur rippled through the room. The defense attorney, Langley, leaned forward in his seat, his sharp eyes studying Elijah. "You want to tear down the system, Elijah?" Langley asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you even know how dangerous that is? What you're doing here is dangerous. It's reckless." Elijah locked eyes with him. "No," he said calmly. What's dangerous is letting a system like this go unchallenged. The tension in the room grew thicker with each passing second. It wasn't just the trial anymore, it was a battle for something far bigger. The players in the courtroom knew it, even if they didn't fully understand what was at stake. "I'm going to do something today," Elijah said, his voice ringing clear, "that's going to change everything." The room fell completely silent. For the first time, the judge seemed truly unsettled. For the first time, the judge seemed truly unsettled. He exchanged a quick glance with Langley, who was now watching Elijah closely, trying to gauge his next move. "What do you intend to do?" the judge asked cautiously. Elijah's response was simple. "I'm going to expose the lies that are hidden in this room." The judge's face reddened with anger, and he banged his gavel hard. "That's enough. You will stop these accusations, or I will hold you in contempt of court." But Elijah didn't flinch. He took a step forward, his voice unwavering. "No," he said firmly. "What you don't understand is that the lies aren't just about one case or one person. It's about all of us. About how this system punishes the weak and rewards the powerful." The judge's expression twisted in frustration, but he was no longer in control. Elijah had shifted the power dynamic in the room, and no one knew how to respond. The defense attorney, Langley, was now visibly agitated, his hand gripping the side of his chair as though he were holding onto something for support. "You have no idea what you're saying," Langley sneered. "You're just a child. What can you possibly understand about law and power?" "I understand more than you think," Elijah replied, his eyes cold. "I've studied the law, every precedent, every loophole, and I know that what's happening here is wrong. I've seen it in the way the system treats people who look like me. I've seen it in the way the rich and powerful never seem to lose. But the truth is..." Elijah paused for a moment, letting the silence fill the room. Everyone was hanging on his every word. "The truth is, I can't lose. Not anymore." There was a collective gasp, and the judge's face turned pale. Langley's smirk faltered, replaced by a look of disbelief. For the first time, Elijah was speaking not just as a child, but as someone who had outgrown his years, someone who understood the game in a way no one else did. Outside the courtroom, the city was buzzing with even more intensity. News stations covered every aspect of the trial. The media frenzy was at its peak. Everyone wanted to know, what was Elijah going to do next? How could a 12-year-old have so much power in the courtroom? But even as the world outside erupted into chaos, Elijah remained focused. The fight was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. As the trial resumed the next day, Elijah felt the weight of what he was about to do. He had pushed the judge, the lawyers, the media, and the public to the edge, but now, he was ready to go further. The real game was about to begin. The moment he stepped into the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. The judge, who had been looking for any way to regain control, stared at Elijah as if the child were some sort of weapon he couldn't disarm. Elijah stood tall, walking to his seat with purpose, his gaze never wavering. The judge was about to speak, but Elijah cut him off. "Before we proceed," Elijah said, his voice commanding attention, "I want to call a witness." The judge blinked in surprise. "What are you talking about?" "I have a witness," Elijah repeated. "And I want them to testify about the truth that's been hidden." The room erupted into chaos. A witness? Who could Elijah possibly bring into this mess? The judge slammed his gavel down, trying to restore order. "You cannot call a witness without prior notice," he shouted. "This is outrageous." But Elijah stood firm, his gaze never wavering. "I don't play by your rules anymore," he said. "You want to know the truth? Then listen to what I have to say." The room fell silent once again, the tension so thick that it felt as though time had stopped. Elijah had done it. He had forced the courtroom to listen to him, and in that moment, it was clear, there was no going back. Whatever Elijah had planned next, it was going to change everything. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable. Elijah had just dropped a bombshell, declaring that he had a witness ready to testify. The entire legal system seemed to be hanging on the precipice of something monumental. If the witness was who Elijah claimed, everything could change. But the question lingered in the air: who could this mysterious figure be? The judge, still visibly rattled, slammed his gavel down, attempting to regain control. "This is highly irregular," he said, his voice strained. "You cannot just introduce a witness at this stage of the trial. This is a court of law, not some theater performance." But Elijah, unfazed by the judge's outburst, stood tall. His composure was unshaken. He knew what he had was more than just an ace up his sleeve, it was the truth, and truth, no matter how inconvenient, had a way of breaking down walls. "I'm not here to play by your rules," Elijah said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm here to expose what's been hidden. The witness can speak for themselves." Before the judge could respond, a figure appeared at the door, a woman. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, and a confident air about her. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward her. Elijah didn't flinch. He had expected her. "Please state your name for the court," the judge demanded, his tone clipped. The woman stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Kara Williams," she said, her voice calm but carrying a weight of authority. "I'm the one who's been watching the case from the outside." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Kara Williams? No one recognized her. No one knew who she was, yet she had just stepped into a scene that was already teetering on the edge of chaos. The judge narrowed his eyes. "And what is your involvement in this case?" he asked, his tone skeptical. Kara didn't hesitate. "I was part of the legal team that handled the investigation years ago. The case you're dealing with right now? It's all a setup." The judge scoffed. "A setup? What kind of wild accusations are you making, Ms. Williams?" Kara stepped closer to the witness stand, her eyes locked on the judge. "I've spent years researching the corruption within this very courtroom. I know what happened here. I know how the truth was buried, how the guilty went free, and how a child was manipulated into a role he never asked for." The judge visibly stiffened, his expression one of disbelief. "What are you talking about? This is preposterous." But Elijah didn't flinch. He knew exactly what Kara was referring to. He had suspected it for months. His instincts, his research, and the clues he had picked up along the way all pointed to the same conclusion: the trial, the judge, and the entire system were compromised. Kara continued. "This isn't just about your courtroom games, Judge. It's about lives being destroyed. Elijah's case isn't the only one with manipulated outcomes. You've allowed this system to continue unchecked, and now, someone is finally calling it out." Elijah looked at her, a sense of validation flooding his chest. He had known it all along. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for everyone who had been wronged by a system that turned a blind eye to injustice. The judge's face twisted in anger. "Enough of this nonsense," he shouted. "This is a court of law, not a circus. You are out of line." But Kara didn't back down. "I'm here to testify to the truth," she said, her voice unyielding. "And if you want me to leave, you'll have to drag me out. Because I'm not going anywhere until the truth is heard." The courtroom was silent, the gravity of the moment settling over everyone like a heavy fog. No one knew what would happen next, but they could feel that something irreversible had just occurred. Kara took a deep breath and began her story. The secret that would bring them down. Kara's testimony didn't just shock the courtroom, it rewrote the narrative of the entire case. She revealed how the case had been carefully orchestrated by powerful figures behind the scenes. The trial, the case against Elijah's family, the entire legal drama had been manipulated to serve an agenda that went far beyond justice. "You see," Kara began, her voice steady but full of emotion, "Elijah's family was targeted because they had information that threatened people in very high places. The case was never about a simple legal dispute. It was about control. It was about silencing those who were brave enough to uncover the truth." The judge scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "What are you suggesting, Ms. Williams? That we've all been part of some grand conspiracy?" Kara didn't flinch. "Yes. Exactly. The corruption runs deeper than you can imagine, Your Honor. From the lawyers, to the prosecutors, to the very people who set up this case against Elijah's family, it's all part of a larger scheme to protect a few powerful people." A gasp swept through the courtroom. The defense attorney, Langley, stood up quickly, but his voice faltered. "This is absurd. You have no proof of these wild accusations." Elijah watched as the once confident attorney now seemed unsure. The control Langley once had was slipping through his fingers. The foundation of the entire case was crumbling, and Elijah could see the cracks forming in real time. Kara's words cut through the tension like a sharp blade. "Proof," she repeated, her eyes cold. "I have all the proof you need. I've been collecting it for years. And now, I'm ready to show you everything." She turned to Elijah. "This young man is the one who is going to expose all of it. And I'm here to make sure that happens." The judge, his face pale, looked at Kara in disbelief. "You're telling me that this child, this boy, has been playing a part in exposing a conspiracy of this magnitude?" "Yes," Kara said firmly. "Elijah isn't just a child, he's a legal genius. He's seen the cracks in the system, and he's using them to uncover the truth. This entire case was a setup, and Elijah is the one who has uncovered it. Not by accident, but by design." The impact of truth. As Kara finished her testimony, the courtroom was left in stunned silence. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The walls that had been built to protect the corrupt and the powerful were beginning to crumble. The judge, now visibly shaken, looked at Elijah. You've known all along?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been before. Elijah met the judge's gaze. "I knew something was wrong," he said quietly. "I didn't know exactly what it was at first, but I knew the system was broken. And I knew that I had to fight. Not just for myself, but for everyone who has been hurt by it." The judge, for the first time since the trial began, seemed unsure of himself. He had no answers. He couldn't deny what Kara had just revealed. You may have won today," the judge muttered, his voice barely audible. "But this isn't over. The system will fight back." Kara, however, wasn't deterred. "Let it fight," she said with determination. "The truth has a way of coming out, whether people want it to or not. And no matter how hard the system tries to suppress it, it will always find its way to the surface." As the courtroom session ended, the atmosphere was charged with a sense of victory. The truth had come out, but the battle wasn't over. Elijah had proven that even in the face of overwhelming odds, even when the system was rigged against him, there was still a way to fight back. And that fight was far from finished. Elijah walked out of the courtroom with a sense of pride, but also with the knowledge that the road ahead would be full of challenges. He had made enemies in high places, and they wouldn't stop until they took him down. But Elijah wasn't afraid. He had already done what no one else had the courage to do. He had exposed the truth. The courtroom was empty now. The echo of the gavel still hung in the air, a reminder of the monumental shift that had just taken place. Elijah stood by the door, his back straight, his heart racing with a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. His fight was far from over, but he had exposed the truth. He had shattered the facade that had been built to protect those who thrived on deception and manipulation. Outside the courthouse, the world felt different. The streets were bustling with the usual sounds of the city, but there was an undercurrent of tension, as if everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Elijah knew the weight of what he had just done. He had turned the legal world on its head, and now, the consequences were coming. As he walked toward the exit, he was greeted by Kara Williams, the woman who had helped him navigate the storm. She was standing by the door, waiting for him, her face serious but with a hint of a smile. She had been his ally from the start, but even now, the victory felt bittersweet. "You did it," Kara said, her voice low but full of admiration. "You really did it." Elijah nodded, though the satisfaction of his victory didn't fully reach his eyes. He had exposed the truth, but what did that really mean? What would happen now? The system that had been so deeply flawed wasn't just going to let him walk away unscathed. He knew that much. "I didn't do it alone," he replied, his voice steady. "You were right there with me." Kara's expression softened. "You're smarter than anyone I've ever met. You didn't just uncover the truth, you forced everyone to see it, whether they liked it or not." Elijah looked down for a moment, thinking about the toll the fight had taken on him. It wasn't just the courtroom drama, it was the constant fear, the threats, and the knowledge that exposing the truth had made him a target. The powerful people who had been hiding behind the curtain were not going to let him get away with it. But there was no turning back now. He had opened the door, and nothing would ever be the same. The first blow. Days after the courtroom showdown, Elijah's life began to change in ways he had never anticipated. At first, the media coverage was intense. The story of the young legal genius who had taken on the corrupt legal system spread like wildfire. Reporters followed him wherever he went, eager to get a glimpse of the boy who had exposed a web of lies that stretched back years. But as the media buzzed with the story, the pressure began to mount. Elijah's family received threats. His school was bombarded with phone calls from reporters, and his friends became targets of online harassment. People wanted answers. They wanted more. And they weren't going to stop until they got them. The first real blow came one morning when Elijah woke to find his house surrounded by black SUVs. Agents from various government agencies had arrived, claiming they needed to question him. But Elijah knew better. They weren't there for answers, they were there to silence him. Kara had warned him that they would come for him, but he had hoped that he could stay out of their reach, at least for a little while longer. But now, it was clear, the system was coming for him with everything it had. The fight for survival. As the days turned into weeks, Elijah found himself caught in a battle not just for the truth, but for his very survival. The agents who came after him were relentless, using every tactic in the book to intimidate him. They offered deals, promising to make his life easier if he would just stay silent. They tried to turn his friends against him, whispering lies in their ears, telling them that Elijah was a danger, that he was someone to be afraid of. But Elijah never wavered. He couldn't. He had come too far to back down now. Every day was a struggle, but each day also brought him closer to the truth he had uncovered. The more they tried to silence him, the more determined he became to keep pushing forward. And then came the day when he received an unexpected message. It was from someone he hadn't heard from in years, someone who had been at the center of the case Elijah had exposed. The message was simple, yet its implications were massive. "I know who you're up against. I know who you've been fighting. And I can help you." Elijah didn't hesitate. He made the call immediately. The person on the other end of the line had information that could take down the entire system, not just the corrupt officials, but the very organizations that had been working behind the scenes to manipulate everything. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The final reveal. A few days later, in a hidden location away from prying eyes, Elijah met with his mysterious contact. The man was older, grizzled, and had the air of someone who had seen too much. But his eyes were clear, and his words were measured. "They've been controlling things for decades," the man said, his voice low. "They've kept the truth buried, manipulated every aspect of the system, and used people like you as pawns in their game. But you, Elijah, you've taken the first step toward exposing everything. Elijah listened closely, his heart pounding in his chest. The man continued, detailing how a network of powerful individuals had shaped the very fabric of the legal system. They had planted false evidence, manipulated cases, and kept the public in the dark about the true extent of the corruption. They never thought someone like you would come along, the man said. They thought they had control, but you've proven them wrong. Elijah absorbed every word. This wasn't just about his case anymore. It wasn't just about his family or his personal fight. It was about a system that had been rigged for years, and now, the pieces were finally falling into place. I can help you take them down, the man said. But you'll have to go public with everything. There's no turning back once you do. Elijah's mind raced. He knew the risks. Going public would make him a target like never before. But he also knew that he couldn't stop now. He had started this fight, and he had to see it through to the end. I'm ready, Elijah said. Let's take them down. The moment of truth. Elijah, with the help of his mysterious contact in Kara, began to prepare the evidence. The truth was undeniable, and they had everything they needed to expose the corrupt system once and for all. They compiled the documents, the recordings, the testimonies, everything that had been hidden for so long. And then, the day came. Elijah went live with a public broadcast. The world was watching. As he spoke, he laid bare the corruption that had infiltrated every level of the legal system. He revealed the names, the deals, the cover-ups, and the crimes that had been committed by those in power. For the first time, the truth was out in the open. The walls that had protected the guilty began to crumble. The people who had been manipulating the system were exposed for who they truly were. The lesson learned. In the aftermath of the broadcast, everything changed. The authorities moved quickly to arrest those who had been named in Elijah's revelations. The media went into a frenzy, covering the story from every angle. Some tried to discredit Elijah, claiming he was just a boy who didn't understand the consequences of his actions, but the evidence was irrefutable. Elijah had become a symbol of resistance, a symbol of the power of one person to change the world. His name became synonymous with truth, justice, and the fight for what was right. But even as the corrupt system began to crumble, Elijah knew that the true battle was not over. The fight for justice would never be fully won. It was an ongoing struggle, one that required constant vigilance. As Elijah stood in front of the camera, his message was clear: no matter how powerful the system, no matter how deep the corruption runs, the truth will always find a way to the surface. And when it does, it has the power to change everything. And with that, Elijah's journey was complete.